Your brain is not your enemy, but it can be. It gives you thoughts, it gives you doubts, it gives you fear, and sometimes it doesn't stop talking. If you let your brain run wild, it will pull you into the past, it will trap you in the future, but it will never let you live in the present. Awareness breaks the illusion of thoughts. Most people live their entire lives without realizing this simple truth, that the thoughts in their head are not always real, not always accurate, not always worthy of trust. The mind has a way of creating illusions, of turning possibilities into fears, of stretching small worries into endless burdens. When you begin to watch these thoughts instead of drowning in them, you suddenly discover a distance between who you are and what your brain produces. Awareness is the light that reveals this distance. Without awareness, every thought feels like reality, but with awareness, you begin to see that thoughts are nothing more than movements of the mind, patterns of energy that appear and disappear, just like clouds floating in the sky. You cannot control the clouds, but you can step back and observe them, knowing they will pass. This is why awareness is the first step to controlling the brain. The moment you notice a thought is the moment you weaken its power. A negative thought, when unnoticed, grows into a storm that shapes emotions, behaviors, and decisions. But a negative thought observed is already losing its grip, because you are no longer inside it, you are standing outside it, watching. This distance gives you freedom. Freedom to choose whether to believe the thought or let it pass. Freedom to respond rather than react. Many people think control means force, but true control begins with awareness, not with fighting. You cannot fight thoughts directly, because resistance often makes them stronger. But you can learn to see them clearly, and when you see them clearly, they lose their ability to control you. Awareness also brings you into the present moment. The brain loves to pull you into the past, replaying mistakes, regrets, and what-ifs. It also loves to drag you into the future, creating endless scenarios of fear, doubt, and anxiety. But the present moment is usually simple, calm, and manageable. Awareness is the bridge that brings you back here, to this very breath, to this very second. In this place, your thoughts lose their chaos. They still come, but they come as whispers, not storms. This is where control is born, not by silencing the mind completely, but by choosing not to be lost in its illusions. To cultivate awareness, you must slow down. Notice your breathing, notice the sensations in your body. Notice the way your thoughts rise and fall. When a thought appears, don't chase it, don't resist it. Just acknowledge it, almost like greeting a visitor at the door. When you do this again and again, you start to see the patterns of your mind. You see which thoughts come back often, which ones are triggered by fear, which ones are fueled by insecurity, and which ones are simply echoes of old memories. With awareness, you become the observer of your mind instead of being a prisoner inside it. Over time, this practice transforms your relationship with your brain. Instead of being dragged by every impulse, you become calm, steady, and clear. You no longer mistake every thought for truth. You understand that some thoughts are useful, guiding you toward action and growth, while others are nothing but illusions created by fear and habit. Awareness gives you the power to choose which thoughts to feed and which ones to release. It is like standing in a room filled with voices and deciding which voice you want to listen to, instead of being overwhelmed by all of them at once. This choice is the foundation of real control. Discipline trains the brain to obey. The mind is like an untamed horse, strong and full of energy, but without direction it runs wildly, dragging you wherever it pleases. Discipline is the reins you place on that horse, not to destroy its strength, but to guide it, to make its power serve you rather than control you. Many people think the brain should naturally do what they want, but in reality the brain only follows habits, and habits are built by discipline. If you let the brain wander, it will chase distractions, feed on laziness, and avoid discomfort. But when you impose discipline, You slowly reshape its pathways, teaching it to focus, to resist impulses, and to work for you instead of against you. Discipline begins with small choices. Waking up when you said you would, putting your phone aside when you promised yourself focus, finishing a task even when your brain tells you to quit. Each time you follow through, you send a message to your brain, I am in charge, not you. Over time, the brain learns this lesson. It becomes easier to direct it, easier to silence its excuses, easier to turn attention toward what truly matters. Without discipline, the brain lives in comfort zones, and comfort zones are prisons. They seem safe, but they keep you from growing, they weaken your mental muscles, and they trap you in cycles of procrastination and regret. Discipline, though difficult at first, builds strength. Every time you choose discipline, you carve a new path in your brain, one that favors resilience, focus, and control. It is important to understand that discipline is not punishment. It is training. Just as an athlete trains the body to endure more than it thinks possible, you must train the brain to handle focus, discomfort, and persistence. The brain resists because it seeks pleasure and avoids pain, but discipline teaches it that short-term resistance leads to long-term power. When you study instead of scrolling, when you meditate instead of complaining, when you work instead of waiting, you are training your brain to obey your higher self instead of your impulses. Slowly, the brain learns to associate effort with reward, focus with satisfaction, persistence with results. Discipline also builds consistency, and consistency is where real transformation happens. A single act of control does little, but repeated acts create identity. Each time you push through resistance, you are not just achieving a task, you are becoming the kind of person who follows through. The brain begins to align with this new identity. It begins to expect effort, it begins to find strength in routine. Over time, what once felt difficult becomes automatic. Waking up early, focusing deeply, resisting distraction. These no longer feel like battles. They become natural because your brain has been trained to obey through discipline. The beauty of discipline is that it compounds. Just as small drops of water carve a stone, small acts of discipline carve the brain into shape. The person who disciplines the mind gains control not just over work, but over emotions, habits, and desires. Anger can be tamed, fear can be reduced, anxiety can be quieted, because the brain has learned to listen. Instead of reacting blindly, it pauses, it considers, it follows the commands of a disciplined mind. This is why discipline is not simply about productivity, it is about freedom. Without it, the brain rules you. With it, you rule the brain. Direction keeps the brain from wandering. The mind is always moving, always searching for something to hold on to. And if you do not give it a purpose, it will create one of its own. That purpose is often fear, worry, or endless cycles of overthinking. A brain without direction is like a boat without a rudder, drifting wherever the current takes it, vulnerable to every wave, every storm, every distraction. But when you set a clear direction, when you decide what you want your brain to serve, it becomes focused, it becomes sharp, and its energy moves towards something meaningful rather than scattering in every direction. Most people believe they lack discipline or motivation, but often what they truly lack is direction. Without a clear goal, the brain will chase whatever feels urgent in the moment, wasting energy on temporary pleasures and small worries. Direction acts like a compass, reminding the brain of where it should go, filtering out distractions, and organizing its power toward a single aim. When you wake up with no plan, your brain fills the empty space with noise. But when you wake up with a mission, your brain aligns itself with it, making it easier to resist impulses and easier to stay focused. A brain with direction is not easily shaken because it has something higher to serve. Direction also gives meaning to struggle. The mind naturally resists effort and seeks comfort. But when you have a clear purpose, discomfort transforms into progress. Pain becomes part of the journey instead of something to avoid. For example, Waking up early feels like suffering without direction, but with direction it feels like commitment. Studying feels like a burden without direction, but with direction it feels like preparation. The brain needs this clarity, otherwise it interprets effort as pointless and drags you back into laziness. When you remind your brain of why you are doing something, you give it a reason to endure, and endurance is the foundation of mastery. A wandering brain is also more vulnerable to negative emotions. Without direction, the brain invents problems that do not exist, magnifies insecurities, and imagines failures that have not happened. But with direction, the same brain becomes a problem solver. Instead of creating endless fears, it searches for solutions. Instead of drowning in doubts, it finds strategies to keep moving forward. This is the power of having a mission. It transforms the brain from an enemy into an ally, from a source of confusion into a source of clarity. Direction does not always mean knowing the final destination. It means knowing the next step, the next priority, the next thing worth your attention. Too many people wait for perfect clarity, but the truth is, clarity grows as you move. The brain becomes sharper when you give it a path to walk on, even if the path is not fully visible. Each step you take in a chosen direction strengthens your mental focus and reduces the space for distractions to creep in. The brain likes movement, and when that movement is guided, it produces momentum. To control the brain through direction, you must be intentional about what you feed it. Every piece of information, every conversation, every environment is fuel for your mind. Without direction, your brain consumes anything, even what weakens you. But with direction, you choose what to let in, you select what supports your purpose, and you ignore what does not. This constant filtering sharpens focus and prevents wandering. The more your brain is reminded of where it must go, the less it strays into meaningless thoughts. Your brain is a tool, not your master. Too often people live as if their brain is the ruler, giving commands, setting limits, and shaping their reality without question. They believe every thought, obey every impulse, and surrender to every emotion, as if the brain were in control of them. But the truth is the brain was never meant to be the master. It was designed to serve you, to help you navigate life, to process information, and to support your decisions. The moment you forget this, you hand over your freedom. The moment you remember this, you reclaim your power. The brain produces thoughts endlessly, but thoughts are not laws, they are suggestions. The brain says stop when it feels discomfort, but that does not mean you must stop. The brain says fear when facing the unknown, but that does not mean danger is present. The brain says give up when effort feels heavy, but that does not mean you are finished. If you see the brain as the master, you will obey these suggestions blindly. But if you see the brain as your tool, you will use those signals as information, nothing more, and decide consciously what to do next. This separation is the beginning of real control. Think of a hammer. A hammer in your hand can build a house or destroy one, but it never decides on its own what to do. The same is true of your brain. It is powerful, but it depends on how you use it. When you believe your brain controls you, every fearful thought feels like truth. Every doubt feels like certainty. Every distraction feels irresistible. But when you place yourself above the brain, when you become the master, you start to direct that power toward building rather than breaking. The brain is full of habits collected from the past, patterns shaped by experience, environment, and repetition. If you do not guide it, it repeats those patterns without questioning. It may cling to negativity, replay painful memories, or exaggerate failures because that is what it has learned. But as its master, you can decide what new patterns to create. You can teach it to focus on gratitude, to imagine solutions, to practice resilience. The brain resists at first, but like any tool, the more you use it for a specific purpose, the sharper it becomes in serving that purpose. Many people confuse intelligence with mastery, but they are not the same. You can have a brilliant brain that constantly generates ideas and yet still be controlled by it. True mastery is not about how many thoughts your brain can create, but about how well you can direct and select those thoughts. A sharp knife is dangerous in untrained hands, but in the hands of a skilled chef, it creates beauty. The brain works the same way. Left to itself, it cuts randomly, but when guided by awareness and discipline, it becomes a precise instrument. When you realize the brain is your tool, you stop arguing with it. You no longer panic when it sends negative thoughts. You no longer obey when it screams for comfort. You no longer collapse when it whispers doubts. Instead, you acknowledge the signal, thank the brain for doing its job, and then make your own decision as the master. This shift is subtle but powerful. It transforms your relationship with yourself. You stop being dragged by impulses and start using the brain as support for your higher will. Thoughts are clouds. Let them pass. The brain creates thoughts the way the sky creates clouds, naturally, continuously, without end. Some clouds are light and soft, drifting without notice, while others are heavy and dark, covering everything in their path. In the same way, some thoughts pass through gently, while others overwhelm the mind and demand attention. The mistake most people make is believing they must chase every thought, analyze every detail, or fight against the storm. But the truth is you are not the thoughts, you are the sky that holds them. They appear and disappear, but the sky remains untouched. When you learn to see thoughts this way, you stop being controlled by them. You let them come, you let them go, and in this simple act of letting pass, you gain peace. The brain never stops producing thoughts. From the moment you wake up until you fall asleep, it generates stories, memories, worries, and endless what-ifs. If you identify with all of them, you become restless, anxious, and exhausted. But if you treat them like clouds, you no longer need to hold on. A negative thought may appear, telling you that you are not enough, that failure is near, that others are judging you. Instead of arguing or proving it wrong, you simply watch it pass, knowing it is only temporary. Like a storm cloud, it cannot stay forever. The more you practice this, the more you realize how many of your thoughts are illusions, not truths. This perspective gives you freedom. Imagine sitting under a sky filled with clouds. You would not try to catch them. You would not fear that one cloud defines the sky. You would simply wait and watch. The same applies to your mind. Every thought that comes is just passing through. When you do not attach to it, it loses power. The brain feeds on your attention. When you believe a thought, when you argue with it, when you fear it, you give it energy to grow stronger. But when you see it and let it drift away, it dissolves. This is the natural way of the mind. Learning to let thoughts pass does not mean ignoring them completely. It means recognizing their nature. Some thoughts are useful, guiding you toward action, reminding you of responsibilities, sparking creativity. Others are useless, born from fear or insecurity, recycling the same stories over and over. With awareness, you learn to see the difference. You do not need to fight the useless ones. You only need to refuse to hold on. In doing so, you create space for clarity. The fewer clouds you cling to, the more open the sky becomes. This practice requires patience. At first, the mind feels chaotic, thoughts appear one after another, and it seems impossible not to react. But with time, you begin to notice a gap between thoughts and your awareness of them. That gap is where freedom exists. Instead of immediately reacting, you pause, you observe, and you choose. The cloud may still be there, but you are no longer lost inside it. You stand apart, watching as it floats across the horizon of your mind. This distance changes everything. Over time, letting thoughts pass becomes natural. The storms of the mind still come, but they no longer shake you. You know that every thought has a beginning and an end, just like every cloud. You know that no matter how dark the sky looks, light always returns once the clouds move on. In this way, you begin to trust the rhythm of your mind. Thoughts will rise, thoughts will fade, and through it all, you remain the open sky, vast and unshaken. Control begins the moment you stop being a slave to the mind. For most people, the brain acts like a master, issuing constant commands that are followed without question.